Hey, it's Sauce, and welcome back to my favorite series, Backpacking Sucks. In this series, I talk about my least favorite parts of my favorite thing, backpacking. If you haven't seen the other videos, be sure to check them out. It's a lot of complaining with a positive spin. In this one, I want to talk about some of the things specifically that can get to you mentally while backpacking or through hiking, because I think that's one of the biggest challenges that we face sometimes outdoors. Backpacking is as much mental as it is physical, in my opinion. Getting through some of these things can be essential to having a successful backpacking trip. I put out new backpacking videos every Wednesday, so don't forget to subscribe. The last one is one that can really intimidate people, and I think especially beginners, and I feel like it becomes more and more prevalent every single year, so be sure to stick around for that. Let's get into it. The first mental challenge I want to talk about is probably more relevant on through hikes, but can definitely still pop up on backpacking trips as well, and that is night hiking. Night hiking can really suck sometimes, especially when you're alone or if you weren't really prepared for it. Here's how I make night hiking suck less and sometimes even make it fun. First, get a buddy. If it's possible, night hiking is so much less scary and intimidating if you have somebody to hike with. Try to communicate with trail family or hiking partners earlier in the day or before the trip even starts. Say, hey, I'd prefer not to night hike alone. What's a plan that we can put in place to make sure that we can hike together once the sun sets? My trail family on the PCT used to plan for this by knowing that we would be hiking probably big days. We probably wouldn't be hiking together all day. So our plan was once the sun started to set, the first person, and we kind of knew where everybody was just because of how we passed each other throughout the day. But once the sun started to set, the first person would stop where they were and wait for everyone to catch up. And that way we can night hike all together. Josh and I also implemented this strategy on the CDT, although it usually meant that he would just wait for me once it started to get dark. Second is to get a better headlamp. I know hiking with a buddy isn't always an option, so something that has really brought me a lot of comfort with night hiking alone is having a headlamp that can get really, really bright. I've night hiked alone many, many times, and I always find comfort in the fact that if I hear something or if I'm just feeling a little nervous, I can turn my night core up to the highest setting and I can see fairly far with that. And it allows me to see enough that I feel a lot more comfortable hiking alone. One thing that can suck about having your headlamp on at night is bugs tend to fly to it because it's the brightest thing around. And so how I mitigate that is either hiking with just my red light on if I'm feeling more comfortable. This is a great way to also not disturb wildlife. But yeah, hike with your red light on and that reduces the bugs a little bit. If they're still bothering you, I also will put my bug head net on at night, so at least they're not actually like flying into my mouth or ears. Next, I am always very loud when night hiking alone. If I'm a little bit nervous about seeing animals, I'll bang my trekking poles together. I'll give out a few shouts. I know this might sound weird and like you might be embarrassing or something, but when you're like in the back country and you know that there's probably not people around, that kind of goes out the window and you're just more concerned about letting a bear know you're rounding the corner in case that is a reality that you're dealing with. Sometimes I'll even play music out loud if I'm really sure that there's not going to be other people around, but definitely be careful with this strategy and make sure that you're following leave no trace principles. But that's one way that you can create noise without shouting constantly. The final thing that I do to kind of make me more comfortable with night hiking is a mental shift. And I know I talk about these a lot when it comes to the sucky parts of backpacking, but I do feel like they're very powerful. I try to remember that these are the same woods that I would be walking through during the day. It's not like I'm in a different terrain, different environment. Like I would be doing this exact hike during the daytime, it just happens to be dark. I know that sounds kind of silly, but try it next time you're night hiking and see if it helps at all. It definitely helps me. Like I look at a tree and I think about what would that look like during the day. It's the same thing. Another mental shift that I try to incorporate is that I am probably safer night hiking in the woods than I am walking around any given city alone at night. And I know that's not exactly making you feel much better about the situation, but it's true and it does help me a lot. Something that the CDT made me all too familiar with was how rough trail can be sometimes, and how much rough tread and overgrowth can kind of impact your mental state on a hike. It really sucks when you've been walking along for like a mile and a half only to happen to look at your maps and realize you've been following a cow path for 30 minutes and now you have to turn around and then re-hike the distance, and you're probably going to be behind for the entire day. It's also no fun slogging through mud or sand for multiple hours on end, and it can be really hard on your body too. But here is how I deal with it. First, we'll talk about mental prep you can do. I try to remember that I would be hiking anyway. I know that sounds really simple, but hear me out. On a through hike specifically, I try to remember that I would be hiking from dawn till dusk no matter what. No matter if I went down a random path or not. No matter if I have to bushwhack or not. I made the decision to hike all day, every day for 5 months, and this is just part of that hike. This is especially helpful if you take like a wrong turn and add a couple miles to your day. It's helpful to remember that, hey, I came out here to hike every day and I just did some bonus miles, whatever. Next, I tried to check the map more, especially in areas where the trail is a little bit harder to follow. I typically try to avoid checking my map regularly, especially on through hikes, because I feel like it can really drag the day on if you're constantly looking every single half mile how far you've gone. But checking my map semi-regularly on the CDT was a huge time saver. And you start to develop an instinct of like, oh, I was on really rough trail for a while, and this trail is like very well maintained and very obvious. Am I sure this is the right one? And I know that sounds counterintuitive, but if you've hiked the CDT, you get it. So my mantra on the CDT became, when in doubt, check far out. Let's talk about mud. Muddy trail is a bummer. There's not a ton you can do about it either. It's kind of a slog through it and deal with it and complain about how much it sucks and then move on kind of situation. There are a few small things I try to do whenever the trail is particularly muddy. I remember the phrase tools, not jewels. This is actually something I heard in the context of skiing. When you get like a big rock chunk out of your skis, people use the phrase they're tools, not jewels. So to remember that like that's why you got them, was to go and do stuff. And I try to remember that about my trail runners. Like these are the tools that I have to protect my feet when I'm slogging through mud, and they're being put to use right now. Next, I try to avoid making ribbon trails. I know stepping directly into puddles is never fun, and walking directly through mud is rough and kind of might stay with you for the rest of the day, but we've all probably seen the result of what happens when ribbon trails are created. I'll try and find some examples to put in this video, but it's basically when the trail gets so muddy, people start to walk next to the trail where it's a little bit drier, and then it creates these like braiding trails that definitely like impact the environment and the landscape. All just because we don't want to get our feet a little bit wet. Reminding myself that I'm not contributing to these also helps when I'm having to slog through the mud. Next, I always rinse. Lots of mud usually means that there is a lot of water around, so you can sort of take breaks to rinse the mud off if it's starting to bother you. Finally, you can make it into sort of a game. Where there is reprieve from the mud and water on the trail, try and make it into a fun little rock hop. Sometimes there's like sticks and things that you can jump on, and if you kind of make that into a fun little challenge for yourself, maybe that'll take your mind off the sucky muddiness for a little while. Trail closures, including fire closures, can be one of the most mentally challenging parts of through hiking. It's also a huge bummer when you're looking forward to a backpacking trip and you realize you can't go because the area is closed or on fire. This is even worse if you've had PTO planned for weeks, your flights are booked, and all of a sudden your trip is falling apart. Trail closures suck. Here's how I deal with them. First, I try to always have a backup plan. This is especially prevalent in years when I'm not through hiking and I'm planning like week-long trips. One thing that really helps with trail closures is anticipating them. I always know that out west it's unpredictable, and especially later in the season, things might be fiery or smoky. So I try to have a backup plan in a different part of the country just in case my plans don't work out. Second, this one is more helpful during through hiking, but I try to understand that it's all just part of the journey. For through hikers, a backup plan is a lot more vague and it's not always an exciting option, whereas like a week-long backpacking trip, you could be equally excited about both plans. I think it helps a lot to be flexible going in, especially for through hikers out west, and it helps a lot to just know that changes of plans are going to be part of the journey, and ultimately you're going to be more resilient because of them. It ultimately is completely out of our control, and the only thing that we can control is our reaction to it. So it's great if we can take these changes in stride and not let them ruin the journey of a lifetime. Do what you need to do to make peace with specific closures. For some people, this means road walking around an entire closure. For some people, that means coming back for that closure later. Whatever that is to you, just make peace with yourself and resolve to do what is important to you. You can also do something fun with that time. This is sort of a different take on both of the previous pieces of advice, but instead of hiking, you can kind of do whatever you want with that unexpectedly open period that you have because of a trail closure. If you're on a through hike, maybe you can gather the trail family and go on a cool road trip. If you're gonna go on a backpacking trip, maybe you pivot and you go to the beach. I don't know, whatever sounds fun to you, you can totally like cheer yourself up from the trail closure with something that's exciting to go do. Finally, I find that staying humble can really help with trail closures. That might not make a lot of sense initially, but I find that the people that seem to struggle the most with sections of trail closing are people who have really tied their ego up in what it means to them to complete an entire thru hike. They have a very like predefined version of what that means, and when something gets in the way of that, it's really hard for them to adapt and sort of still complete the journey in a meaningful way. I think it's helpful to remember that ultimately Mother Nature is boss and we are lucky to be out there at all. There's a saying that I've heard that has really resonated with me, and that is to stay loosely tied to lofty goals. So the lofty goal in this instance would be a thru hike, and how you end up getting there can be a little bit different than maybe what you initially anticipated. That's all the complaining I've got for now. Don't forget to check out the rest of the series and leave any thoughts or questions that you have in the comments. Thanks for watching. Bye.